Welcome back to the Early Weigh-In Podcast. Back in the Apex again this week for another middleweight showdown here. We got UFC Vegas 86, headlined by Jack Hermansson taking on Joe Bodybags Pyfer. We got Dan Ige taking on Andre Fili in the co-main event. It's a fight night of 14 fights, man. Excited to break them down with you, try to find some value spots, try to get back on track for myself this week. Go ahead and throw it over to you before we start. Talk about my night and really good night from yourself.
Yeah, a little mixed bag of results, but nothing that we can't get back from. We'll take a look over at your card first. Straight bets were not there. You had the Vivian Arujau. You knew it was going to be close. We talked about the plus 3.5, but you went ahead and went on the plus 275 Vivian Arujau, and she made it close. She won a round, had some control time, but Natalia Silva does look like the real deal. I was only a 0.5 unit stab. We didn't get to see the Makhmud Muradov fight play out, although I know that a lot of people were pretty confident on him. And I imagine they're going to book Khizriev really soon here. We were both on this Blake Builder read, and it was just a bad read. I think at the end of the day, it was just one of those ones that you got to chalk up to just being a bad read. Didn't expect Jung Young Lee to be as big as he was in there. I think your best bet on the card was the over in the main event, and fight goes to decision at plus 185. You hit that twice, and you only lost minus 4 units on the night. Like I said, nothing that you can't come back from. Looking at my card, it was the Blake Builder fight that I doubled down on that really got me from having a great night to just a good night. I was on Renato Moicano at minus 165, and then Jamal Pogues to start off the night as an underdog. Saw that as a 50-50 fight. Looked like a 50-50 fight going to the scorecards. Happy to get the sway on the judges' scorecards in that one. And then I actually tailed you on this fight doesn't go the distance in the Diana Belbita Molly McCann fight. That one at plus 175, plus 165. That was some great value on a fight that didn't even have to get out of the first round for it to cash. So that was an excellent find for sure. I ended up the night plus 2.39 units, hoping to keep the ball rolling into this next week. Let's see. We start off the card in the bantamweight division. Daniel Marcos taking on Aoriqileng. I'm a fan of Daniel Marcos, man. He's coming off the Davy Grant split decision. Really, really close fight, but I'm glad that he didn't lose his undefeated record. I'm hoping that he looks at that fight, understands that he's got to do a little bit more to separate himself. And I do feel like the UFC is kind of doing him a favor here and giving him an opponent that he seems to have some pretty significant advantages over. And I think that he can kind of set the record straight and continue that win streak, kind of bounce back in the right direction. I look at Aoriqileng. He is a wrestling heavy attack. He throws with a lot of power. I think that he was huge at 125 pounds and up at 135 pounds. It's harder for him to implement that just bully game plan that he wants to. Daniel Marcos does a really good job of getting his back off the cage. He does a really good job of throwing up the middle whenever somebody has forward pressure, baits people in so that he can land his counterattacks. He's got an 89% takedown defense. And just systematically, I kind of expect him to just break down Aoriqileng over 3 rounds. I'm not really sure if he's going to get the finish, but I do expect him to win. And he is one of the legs in the parlay that I've already played for this week with the main event coming up.
Yeah, on the same side, man. I think Daniel Marcos is about 70% here, so I was happy to play him at the minus 200 number with yourself. I backed him twice already, an underdog on Contender Series, I believe it was, when he's coming off like a 2-year layoff. I backed him as an underdog against Simon Oliveira in his debut. I like this guy a lot, man. I think he's put a lot into his game, training at a great camp, an American Top Team. And, anybody that stands at range, if he's willing to pick up the volume from that Davy Grant fight, I think he's a very dangerous opponent for a lot of guys. You talked about the attacks up the middle. I think he's going to beat this lead leg up of Aoriqileng and make him have to close the distance. And I think it's going to continue to just light him up on the feet as the fight progresses. Haven't really seen a lot from Aoriqileng that I like. I think the guy's cardio kind of fails him late in the fight. I think is very, very poor defensively. what Molina dropped him a few times, did he not? Being finished by Ayman Zahabi is never a good look. And looking back through his record, I know we're reaching 4 years ago and stuff, but 4 losses on the Asian regional scene in 2018, 2019, it's still not a good look, man. I think if a good Daniel Marco shows up on Saturday, he's a completely different level of fighter than Aoriqileng is, and wouldn't be a shock if he were to get a late finish here as well. Moving up, 145, we got Hyder Amil versus Fernie Garcia. This is one I do, just being honest, I need to do a little bit more tape here. This is a third opponent change for Hyder Amil. He doesn't have the highest level of opponents, but, when you see him fighting in Bellator, LFA, it's good organizations to be in. I think the guy fights at a really, really high pace. The problem with Fernie, man, is Fernie's tough as nails, never being finished. And so, regardless of it being 8 days up a weight class, I can count on him to give a good account of himself. He's not going to give the fight away, not going to give up in a fight. The guys on the L3 searching, not to get cut. So I do think you're going to get a really good version of Fernie Garcia, one that's going to be tough to put away. I side with Hyder Amil because I like the pace. I think he's going to be able to just outwork Fernie over 15 minutes and still a decision. But UFC experience for Fernie and stuff, it kind of makes it seem dog or pass here, man. I don't have the biggest opinion on this fight. I'll take Hyder Amil by decision. Very little confidence though.
I'm gonna mirror what you said. I don't really have much to add to that fight. Moving up the card, we go to the light heavyweight division. Zach Pauga taking on Bogdan Guskov. Pauga in his last fight, I thought that as the fight progressed, you started to see the limitations of Zach Pauga's stand-up game. He started really telegraphing his entries whenever he was trying to throw his strikes, and that's something that I think that Bogdan Guskov could exploit early. I think Guskov, he's going to be a little bit faster than Pauga, might be a little bit undersized, so I'm worried about Pauga being able to get that grindy wrestling game that we've seen in the past from him. But I do think when he's closing the distance that Guskov's going to have the power and speed to make him pay for that. And he has been knocked out by Usman in the past, and I think Usman is relatively slow whenever you look at Guskov's tape. All that being said, Guskov, the wrestling defense looked a little bit suspect early on in that Oezdemir fight. And so I do think that he might have some limitations in his game as well. This is one of those fights where, if Pauga's not trying, not thinking about what's the best game plan for himself coming into this fight, he could get caught early. But this could also be a boring grind fest from Zach Pauga if he wants to. I think that he's got a significant wrestling edge. I'm going to go with Bogdan. I do think that he's going to be able to catch him, but I don't know if I'm convinced that Bogdan plus 130 KO is enough whenever he's plus 100 right now.
I siding with you with the underdog here in Bogdan Guskov as well. Zach Pauga, especially at 205, really just hasn't been that impressive, to me. It doesn't look like he could take the heavyweight power, but I actually thought he was a little bit better at at heavyweight. I thought his speed advantage was big over a lot of the guys at heavyweight, and that was what he had. That's what he had going for him. Down at light heavyweight, again, just really haven't been too impressed with the guy. He's 35 years old already with only 8 pro fights. Outside of some decent boxing and kickboxing or decent cardio, he's never been dangerous throughout his career. He's one of these guys that, I don't know, with very little finishing upside at 205, you're playing with fire, constantly going to decision. And I think he's playing with fire here with Guskov, man. He's pretty much the exact opposite. This guy's got 17 fights and he's only seen the scorecards one time. And with finishing upside like that on an underdog, it's usually always intriguing to me. You look at, double the amount of fights, the younger fighter, way more dangerous guy. I think Bogdan Guskov is the side here, man. There was times early in that Volkan fight when he was swinging, like I said, I was kind of clinching up, even though I knew Volkan was going to win the fight eventually. Some of these guys aren't going to be able to handle that power, and Zach Pauga is one of the guys that I don't think is going to be able to handle that power if Bogdan does land. So siding with you on the underdog as well. I think the lines come down maybe some other people agree with us here. So, yeah, I think Guskov inside the distance is a pretty good look Saturday. Fight, I do have some action on at 170, man. We got Jeremiah Wells taking on Max Griffin. I took an early stance on Max Griffin here, a little over a unit at plus 164. It's nice to have some closing line value, but it kind of does seem like he's taking a lot of love this week. You don't like a lot of people on the underdogs with you. But I do like my stance on him, man. With Jeremiah Wells, the guy's 37 years old. Age really isn't that much of a concern for me. When I look at the durability, Jeremiah Wells submitted in his last fight, knocked down multiple times by Matt Semelsberger. And you got Max Griffin with a sample size of 29 fights, and the guy's only been, knocked out once, never been submitted. I do favor him durability-wise. As far as resume experience, you give that to Max Griffin. If this fight were to stay on the feet, I do think Wells is the more explosive of the two. But I think Max Griffin is a whole lot more technical with his work. You look at his past couple fights prior to Morales, which I think Michael Morales is a very, very stud prospect. Max Griffin takes round one from him. But previously to that, man, knocked down 4 fights in a row. And then throw in the one before that, it doesn't count as a knockdown, but he TKOs Brahimaj on the feet. This guy's got power that I'm not really sure if Jeremiah Wells is going to be able to take. In that Semelsberger fight, Semelsberger does not have good takedown defense. If Jeremiah Wells was not able to get him to the ground after some of those knockdowns, it's a completely different fight. Cardio, I favor Max Griffin there. I feel like, Max Griffin's a decision machine lately, and if this fight goes to decision, I feel like I really want that Max Griffin ticket in my hand. I think he wins the later rounds at a pretty high clip. And so for that many advantages that I see on an underdog at plus 164, I kind of had to take my shot here, man. I think the line's closing down more appropriately in my eyes, but I think there's too many advantages for Max Griffin for me not to take a stance on him.
I wish so badly that I could join you. You talked about last fight watching Guskov and cringing in the tape. Well, that's how I felt with Wells.
Yeah.
And literally everything that he did, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's hard to watch it, man. Like, here's the thing. Whenever I look at him versus Max Griffin has been a decision machine, but I look at the guys that he's been fighting on his record, and none of them are really physical beasts. Alex Morono, Alex Oliveira, Carlos Condit, Neil Magny, Tim Means. None of those guys are going to just absolutely get in the octagon and bully you. And he's only winning half of those. Michael Morales, that is somebody who is a physical specimen. But it's not somebody who's going to be using a grappling heavy attack like Jeremiah Wells should and could in this fight. There are some times in Max Griffin's latest fights where he's been willing to engage in 50-50 exchanges, especially early on. I think that could be bad news for both guys. Jeremiah Wells carries the power to knock anybody out with one blow. Where Max Griffin, I can't really say the same, but he does have the durability to withstand a few of those exchanges and maybe land some good offense of his own. I think Max is the better technical striker. He throws straighter punches, has more experience, but Wells, just being the physical beast that he is, I think if he comes in with the right game plan, he has all the tools to look a good favorite. I think as it gets down closer, I'm considering laying a bet on Wells, but it's he's still gotten to MMA late. He's 37 years old, like you said, and he has 15 fights. I think that there's still a lot to figure out with Wells. I do like the gym that he's coming from in Philly. I think that they can, hard. Yeah, I think that they can put together a decent game plan. So I'm going with Wells officially, but I'm not sure where I stand as far as betting that fight, but I do wish you the best on that. You were on it before anybody else on Twitter. That's what I would say.
I was.
Let's see. Moving up the card to the light heavyweight division, Devin Clark versus Marcin Prachnio. We talked a little bit about this one earlier. I told you I think that it takes a lot for Devin Clark to have success. He has a very grindy style that can work for a while, but it's taxing on the gas tank, man. And when he can't implement that grindy game plan, close the distance, I do feel like he struggles to find a plan B. He doesn't really have much more than trying to just close that range and implement his wrestling. Marcin Prachnio, on the other hand, I don't think that he's been tested too much either. Any of the fights that he is fighting decent competition, he's losing. And then in the fights that he has won, Ike Villanueva, who did he just beat? William Knight, who stood there like a punching bag the entire 15 minutes. And then Khalil Roundtree, another guy who mentally has struggled a little bit. And Prachnio's back was against the wall in that fight. And he came out and, made a good account of himself after being knocked out 3 times in a row in the UFC. So he's back now. It seems like his chin issues are a little bit better. Devin Clark, never really known for being a knockout artist by any means. I think that if Prachnio can make Devin Clark work, there's a possibility that he could win this fight. But as far as who I'm picking, I think Devin Clark is the better MMA fighter. I'm just not sure if he can. I wish he'd get his diet right and go down to middleweight. Because truly, I don't think he's the size for light heavyweight. So Devin Clark's the official pick, but I'm not really happy about it. Wouldn't bet it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to end up laying off as well. Solely just because of the fact I don't think Devin Clark's a really a minus 200 fighter. Like you said, pretty one-dimensional, doesn't have a path B if option A is not working for him. So you don't really like to lay juice on those type of fighters. But I can always trust Devin Clark to go in there and push a pace, to stick to his wrestling. And I do think that is what could really neutralize and make the fight look easy. Anybody who's really ever tried to take Marcin Prachnio down has had success. I think he's rocking just north of a 50% takedown defense statistically in the UFC. When you're giving him range, he throws good kicks. He has good volume. He can outpoint guys, but I just don't think Devin Clark's going to give him that space, man. In the apex, the type of pace that he's at, I think he cage pushes him. I think he lands some takedowns. I think he's, durable as shit. There's fights where he's got like his teeth coming out or something and he's still fighting. So dude's tough, man, and I know I can trust him to stick to his grappling. So I think he's an easy pick for me, but I don't think I'm gonna have any action on Devin Clark. We dropped down quite a bit to the women's strawweight division where we see Loma Lookboonmee taking on Bruna, Brasil. Breaking down, watching some tape, I do think Loma is the rightful favorite here, man. I've watched both of their fights against Denise Gomez. Loma stands up, walks away from her, foot sweeping her. She's almost playing with her to an extent, I think Loma, clearly the better striker here, wrestling upside. She's the faster girl, better Muay Thai. She's only 28 years old, man. We've literally seen this girl grow up in the UFC. I think she's had only 2 or 3 fights outside the UFC. The rest of them have been in the UFC. Only issue is the size disadvantage, which does oftentimes mean a lot in women's MMA, but it's pretty much something that she's used to being at a disadvantage with. So I think if she closes the distance here, I think she can land takedowns and really neutralize this fight. I'm not too high on Bruna Brasil. I laid some juice, man, as a bit of big bet on Bruna Brasil against Shanna Bannon, who I did not think was UFC level, and it's a unanimous decision win. But man, she definitely did not pull away with that fight in the way that I was thinking her that she would. I just don't rate her too highly. I think skill for skill, Loma is the rightful favorite. And I think I'm going to hit the over 2.5 in this fight. Bruna Brasil, she's been knocked out 3 times, and so that's bringing the number down quite a bit. But I think in women's strawweights, goes the distance should be almost minus 250 every single time out of principle. So if I'm going to get like minus 180 in a fight that I do see going over probably 70% of the time, I just got to trust my read, man. So I'm going to play goes the distance here in this Loma Bruna Brasil fight. You've
been locked in on those overs. I tend to like that one in this fight as well. Loma, she's a fan favorite for me as well, and it's kind of hard to look at her fights in an unbiased way. I think that, like you said, she has all the potential to win this fight, but even though she's young in the sport, she still seems a little one-dimensional to me, and I don't want to be caught on the wrong side of one of her fights, picking a minus 275, and what I would still consider lower-level women's MMA. So perfectly fine layoff spot, regardless of what you do, but I certainly like the over more often than not. So I see why you're on that for sure. Moving up, we go to the lightweight division. Timothy Cuamba taking this fight on short notice, 3 days notice, against Bolaji Oki. Cuamba, he looks really good. I know that there's a lot of people who are high on him, eager to play him in the UFC. From what I saw on tape, he has a good movement, really good combos. I saw him mixing in takedowns in his last fight, and he even had some good top control in that. And, to be honest, I think that he was coming off the high of his TKO win 3 days prior to accepting this fight. And he made a impulse decision. He jumped the gun because he's getting the offer in the UFC. He knows win or lose. He's going to still be given some opportunities in the UFC, but this is up a weight class. And truthfully, I think it's the UFC machine that is eager to showcase Oki here. And they decided to sign anyone that picked up the phone, and it just happened to be Cuamba. Under normal circumstances, I think that, like I said, Cuamba is he'll be a serviceable UFC fighter, but I do think that the cards are kind of stacked against him here. Oki, while he is a little bit untested, he is certainly a true lightweight. He is super athletic, really powerful. And I do think that as this line, I think that he's a decent parlay piece as far as this card. It's a little bit of a spotty card, and I think that he's one of the more locks of the card. And it seems like people are so interested in betting Cuamba that we're going to get Oki at like minus 175, which is a perfect parlay piece, or if you just wanted to play it straight.
Yeah, so with Bolaji Oki, I almost like imprinted in my memory. I was on vacation when he was on Contender Series, and you text me to just bet him at plus money. I didn't have any tape on it or nothing. I cut on, first fight is Bolaji Oki. Dude walks in the octagon, and I'm like, this is who we're getting plus money on? I text you immediately, dude. I mean, physical specimen, athletic freak. And Dylan Salvador, who he walked down and put away, was a very, very talented striker. Bolaji is game. He's super powerful. I love the left hook to the body. I'm with you. I think Cuamba has bit off a bit more than he can chew here in his UFC debut. But oftentimes, you see that with these Contender Series guys, eager to get re-signed, take a fight, and he's probably awaiting a very easy featherweight opponent next. But I'm with you, man. I like Bolaji Oki. Maybe inside the distance here, man. The way he fights, it's a hard sell that a lot of guys are going to be able to take that,
Yeah.
Next fight's at 170. It's our prelim main event. It's a killer fight, man. Trevin Giles taking on Carlos Prates. And Prates, just truth be told, was one of the more impressive guys for me off the Contender Series last year. He's not one of these 22, 23, 24-year-old guys. He's 30 years old, over 23 professional fights. You see 6 losses on the regional scene. The guy's paid his dues, man. He's hit the bumps in his career. He's on 10 of his last 11 fights is what I'm counting here that he's won. So he seems to have found his groove, man. His last loss was in 2018 to an 8-0 undefeated Russian who is still undefeated to this day. As he goes forward, I do think there's a chance Carlos Prates drops the ball at a big favorite price tag. I still think dominant wrestlers in the UFC, good submission artists, they could find their way on the mat with him. But I see him trading at Fight Nerds, Caio Baralho. The guy is focusing on, the weak points of his game. On the feet, he's an absolute handful for anybody willing to stand with him, man. The left hand is wicked. The setup for the head kicks, it's his UFC debut, and I'm willing to put a stamp that this guy's got one of the best head kicks in the UFC. The fight prior to the Contender Series hurts a guy with it, then sleeps him with it. I mean, the fight with Mitch Ramirez looked really good, man. And with Trevin Giles, dropping to 170, typically he is the bigger guy, but it's not going to be the case here against Carlos Prates. He's kind of a guy that even with Giles, even when he's up, he finds a way to lose these fights. His gas tank lets him down late. I think he's a bit of a fragile guy, just truth be told. And so if he doesn't get his wrestling going, I think he's going to get lit up on the feet, man. So Trevin Giles is not somebody that I can trust to go in there and implement a game plan and it not fall apart. So I'm on the Carlos Prates side, and I likely think he gets it done inside the distance.
I want to bet Prates. Like he's certainly a fun fighter to watch and tape study. But I think that this is a little bit of a tough test to debut against Officer Giles. He's fought some of the best guys, and he's got a weird style where he's able to, if he's able to implement that jab, he can just throw you off your rhythm and really kind of give you a unique look, similar to like Neil Magny, where sometimes he's just got an awkwardness about him that makes people get out of their normal rhythm. And it's something I'm excited to see Prates have to figure out because, he does look like a decent guy to add into the welterweight division, but I'm not sure I want to lay this type of price tag on him at this point. So it's a fight where I'm just kind of looking to see how it plays out. Prates will be the pick though. We move up to the middleweight division, Rodolfo Vieira versus Armen Petrosyan. I know that you've planted your flag on this fight already. I have not yet, and I'm not really sure where I'm going with this one, man. I look at the fight, Rodolfo Vieira, one of the most credentialed BJJ practitioners to ever step in the octagon. He's 4-2 in the UFC so far. Although he has had some fights where he's able to showcase a jab that he's got, some learned striking, I do think that he still has what we would call basic striking. Petrosyan, on the other hand, a clear striking advantage. Unfortunately for Petrosyan, the best version of his striking game would involve him having a lot of success kicking. And I think that's, I'm a little worried that that's going to give Rodolfo the opportunities that he needs to get this fight to the mat. And with Petrosyan, we've seen him taken down 12 times in the past 5 fights. That being said, Vieira in that Cody Brundage fight, he probably should have lost that fight, man. And if you're losing to Cody Brundage, that's a huge red flag. Unlike Brundage, Armen does a really good job of circling off the cage whenever he gets backed up. We saw evidence of that in the Gregory Rodriguez fight, where the first 2 rounds he's on his bike, sticking and moving. But at the same time, G-Rod was able to get him down, and I guarantee you that Rodolfo Vieira would have finished Armen Petrosyan if he got him in the same positions that Gregory Rodriguez was able to get him in. So I'm having a tough time trying to read this fight. Armen's certainly better than Cody Brundage,
That's good.
That's what I'm having trouble wrapping my head around. Rodolfo, though, I think, similar to Mackenzie Dern, if they can implement their game plan and get the fight where they want, they could beat anybody in the world. But it's just a matter of if they can. And I'm not totally convinced that Rodolfo Vieira can in this fight. Petrosyan gives up his back when he gets up. I don't know, man. This is a tough fight, toss-up fight for me. I'm going to go for Petrosyan for the sake of the podcast being head-to-head. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on it for sure.
Yeah, so, rebooked fight. Vieira took some action their first time down in Brazil, seems to be taking some more action this week. And, yeah, I'm on the Vieira side here. You pretty much gave a lot of points as to why I bet Vieira here. I feel like the small cage, the kicks, like you said, a lot of it leans to Vieira being able to close that distance and get his takedowns. AJ Dobson, Kyle Barajo, Gregory Rodriguez, all these guys been able to get Petrosyan down. And I do think Vieira's as dangerous as all 3 of those combined if he were to get you down. I think he's a tactician on the mat at getting the back. You mentioned Armen always giving it up, getting back to his feet. And, truth be told, dude's still chasing his first UFC finish. If this does slip into the second and third round, there's not a lot of finish upside on the Petrosyan side unless Rodolfo Vieira is gassing, That's the only way I see Armen finishing this fight. And Rodolfo Vieira proved to me in the Stoltzfus fight. He's still dangerous in round 3, man. He needs one back take to be able to finish the fight. And so I keep going back to just stylistically, man, when I see a guy taken down 12 times, like you said, in 5 fights, and I think he's going to get taken down again here. And he's got one of the most dangerous middleweights searching for that submission, world-class jiu-jitsu. So at minus 115, I think he has potential, to look minus 400 in round 1 here. So I wanted to take a stab on him. Nothing too heavy though, because shit could get hairy in round 2 or 3. But at minus 115, I definitely thought it was worth the dice. Moving on, Michael Johnson, Darius Flowers at 155. Michael Johnson, he's the better fighter, but this is dog or pass, like, clearly to me. Michael Johnson's going on 38 years old. He's 13-15 in the UFC. He is only 21-19 overall. Like, you know, a .500 fighter on a main card. You know, not a lot of good stuff is going for Michael Johnson late. Losses to Stevie Ray, Darren Elkins, Jamie Malarkey. Like, he's not getting beat by the cream of the crop Gaethjes and Khabibs anymore, you know? So, I mean, it's lower level guys that are beating him. And the last two losses or last two knockout losses to Josh Emmett and Carlos Diego Fajeda, like, man, those are bad knockouts, you know, arms stiff and toes curled. Like, that's bad knockouts, man. And Darius Flowers is athletic. Darius Flowers is fast. He is dangerous in round one. But he's pretty flaky durability-wise. You know, I think a lot of his losses come by submission, not so much knockout. So, and, you know, Michael Johnson's never really been a super offensive wrestler or submission threat. So, I don't know, man. Super low-level fight in my eyes, but I think it's dog or pass. I think Darius Flowers actually has potential to put Michael Johnson away.
Yeah, I think the days of betting Michael Johnson as a favorite are long gone, man. You talked about how many losses he has. Truthfully, it's any time that a fighter touches those double-digit losses is when I get super skeptical about him, and it's a reoccurring thing on this card. Aoriqileng, Max Griffin, Michael Johnson, Touchy Fili. Even if they're not getting absolutely, you know, dusted, just finished, they're still, you know, the blueprint's out on how to beat them. And if they're not adapting their game as they progress in it, you know, it's tough to get behind them whenever there's a favorite price tag. As far as Darius Flowers goes, he was fighting up at middleweight a couple fights ago, and now he's, you know, at 5'9", that seems like the appropriate weight class would be 155 pounds. And I'm excited to see him at this weight class. More of a learning fight for him in my eyes than anything. It's just like, hey, here's a veteran. Let's see how you can do. I know Jake Matthews was a tough debut, you know?
Right.
So I'm excited to see how he fights. I think that this is an interesting one. I'll pick him for the podcast's sake, Darius Flowers. Moving up to the 185-pound division, Brad Tavares taking on Gregory Rodriguez. I think G-Rod, you know, he's one of these guys who has all the potential in the world, man. He has all the tools to be a champion, honestly, but he has some fight IQ problems and then some durability problems as well. In this fight against Brad Tavares has never really been known as a finisher, but he's one of these guys who's always been extremely durable. And I think that could work against Gregory Rodriguez if he can't get him out early. Tavares, constant, you know, I haven't been looking up the stats to back this up, so I don't know if it's gonna hold water. But Tavares seems like a guy who's constantly been forced to fight wrestlers, but he's done a good job of getting back to his feet. And I imagine that Gregory Rodriguez is somebody who's going to be shooting for takedowns. But if Tavares is able to make him work, keep it on the feet, I do think that there's going to be exchanges where Tavares' chin, if it holds up, he could make Gregory Rodriguez pay. And he could possibly hop on a finish that nobody's really expecting. So if it's a crazy number, I'd be looking at Tavares inside the distance. Maybe just straight up if it's a crazy number. I'm not even sure what that's lined at right now. Plus 205, like, yeah, better than plus 200. I'll consider it. I'll have to dig more into it for sure. But Tavares plus 205 doesn't sound terrible. Strictly because Gregory Rodriguez at super high favorite numbers is not something I want to play, knowing that he's a little iffy chin-wise.
Yeah, man. I think Brad Tavares is likely the value side as well, and it's because Brad Tavares is such a good, like, always does a great job of keeping the fight on the feet. His takedown defense, his get up game is phenomenal. I truth be told, I don't know if Gregory Rodriguez is going to get a takedown here, and if there's a fight that's just played out on the feet for 15 minutes, I know Brad has his concerns. He's been TKO'd 4 times throughout his career. You know, the older fighter with a ton of fight miles, but. And you mentioned it. Gregory's got just as much as concern on the feet. You know, finished by Jordan Williams, what the Ferreira guy in the first round, we just bonked him. And then even the Junyun Park fight, I mean, he is visibly hurt on the feet, and during that fight. And so I can't trust his chin whatsoever in a fight that I do think is a high level or high pace slock 'em robots, because I think that's what Brad always kind of makes these fights. And, I've seen him survive one with Duplessis and then get absolutely slipped by Bruno Silva. And so, I kind of think maybe that was one of those situations where that fight with DDP going the distance might have taken a lot of out of Brad, might have left a piece of him that night. Because when he showed up against Bruno Silva, he did not look good. And then there's not much that I could take from the Chris Weidman fight because I think that's one of the most washed up fighters on the roster. Man, it's really hard because Brad has so many red flags as well. But I do think he's live to finish the fight almost just as much. And if this were to go to a decision, I think he's proven over time that he's a better at winning a decision than Gregory Rodriguez is. So I'm kind of with you, man. I think at plus 200, Brad Tavares is likely going to be the value side. Just don't know if I want to get behind him at the stage of the career that he's at.
I just looked up the fight doesn't go to decision, and it's minus 120, minus 125. I don't hate that either, honestly.
I saw the under 2.5 sitting at like plus 110 earlier in the week or something. I think it's taking a little bit of action. It's like even money or something now. But yeah, I at that number with guys with the durability concerns of these two I definitely think it's probably worth a poke. Mm-hmm. I know you like your middleweight unders.
I do.
We're staying in the middleweight here. Iho Pateria coming in on short notice, taking on Robert Bryzak. It's a fight that I currently am still taping. Bryzak taking the short notice opponent, Ihor, and I think we were looking through his record right before we started. He's only fought at middleweight, I think, once in his career. So I think he can make it. It's the fact that can he make it on short notice, and being TKO'd in his last 3 of his 4 fights. What's the chin like, especially with the weight cut? He looked good pretty early against Bellato last time, but just gassed himself out, beating the shit out of Bellato. So I don't know how good his gas tank is late as well with Bryzak. I do need to tape the guy a little bit more. The wins that he has aren't really too impressive. It seems like anytime there's a step up in competition that he kind of drops the ball. And I see some people playing Ihor Pateria this week. Kind of like Brad Tavares. There's just too many red flags with a new weight class, with him taking it on short notice. Too many red flags to back the underdog. But I think I'm going to pick Ihor Pateria, actually.
Yeah, I'm going with you. I think Ihor's the side here as far as price-wise. This is another, I'm not exactly sure why it's the featured bout on the main card.
Right. I was quite shocked. Bryzak was even on the main card with Duraev too. It's just like no one knows this guy.
Yeah, that's super interesting. The fight doesn't go the distance is minus 1250, so maybe that tells us a little bit of something. I think that they're just wanting a huge knockout either way here, and I assume that they're going to get it. Pateria, he goes for it absolutely. Robert, haven't seen enough of him to trust him. What was that?
I was just looking at his record, and it's for 20-5. It's quite fraudulent.
Yeah, dude. I mean, they're both. It's questionable UFC caliber competition right here, but at least they're both finishers, and I think the UFC can appreciate that, which is why they're getting this spot. So whoever comes out ahead on this fight, I expect to be a huge fade in the next fight because they'll probably be mispriced, So I'm with you on Ihor here. I'll pick him for the podcast's sake. Moving up to the co-main event, Dan Ige taking on Andre Fili. Dan Ige is somebody I enjoy backing him, man. Whenever he was coming off of that 3-fight losing streak over Chan Sung Jung, Josh Emmett, Movsar Evloev, people were really down on him, and you could get him like almost even money. He was minus 120 against Damon Jackson, dude. And I remember laying the hammer on that and being real happy with how he performed. And then the fight against Nate Landwehr, a great stylistic matchup. And then Bryce Mitchell. Bryce is one of these guys who, truthfully, I'm not sure how good he is, man. Like I enjoy him as a person. I enjoy his fight style, but I'm not really sure how he matches up with the upper echelon of the division. We've seen him against Ilya Taporia, but Taporia's fighting for the belt, so who knows how that looks against
Well,
Calvin.
we saw him against Josh Emmett too.
Oh, that's that's true. That's very true. So yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel about Dan Ige in this fight. I like the fact that Andre Fili doesn't have much of a submission threat. He kind of relies on KOs, and Dan Ige has a chin who it seems like he could take a bat to the face, dude. Like he willing to stand and bang. I think that he'll probably get a little bit of that with Andre Touchy Fili. This looks like a fight that could hit the under, but with featherweights being notorious for not hitting unders, it's tough to bet that. I'd be on the Dan Ige side, and minus 170. It's certainly tempting. Just haven't found my way to that yet.
I'm on him for 2 units at minus 170. I like this spot for Dan Ige as well. You got the guy on the full camp, the guy that I think's the far superior boxer, has the far superior durability here as well. You look at it competition wise, Dan, Ige's main evented before. There's a lot of things that I like about Dan Ige here, and one thing that always backing him, dude's going to fight for your money. He's hard. He's never been finished, so he's going to be there the full 15 minutes, giving you a fight. And with Andre Fili, man, truth be told, there's just times where he shows up and times where he doesn't. I kind of feel like he is getting toward the tail end of his career. He's got 10 fights. He never really puts anything together. He wins 1 or 2 and then drops at any type of step up in competition. And this kind of feels like, in my opinion, a quick way to get a co-main event spot, quick way to make a little cash, but not a fight that I truly think he has many advantages in. I don't see any finish upside for him here. I don't see him landing any takedowns. The loss to Nathaniel Wood, who was really just a bantamweight, who was struggling to make the weight, out here dropping him, taking him down. Again, man, there's just Andre Fili is very, very inconsistent, but even on his best days, I do think Dan Ige is a better fighter. I've got 2 units on Dan Ige, minus 170 to return. I'm a little over a unit. And then I think I am going to put a unit on the over 2.5 here. The only person I see finishing this fight is a Dan Ige knockout. I don't see either one of them submitting each other, and I don't see Dan Ige finishing, or I don't see Andre Fili finishing Dan Ige. So I am going to take a shot at the over, or the goes the distance here, because, if Dan Ige were to find that finish, I'm still going to profit a little bit, but I want to trust my read in a fight that I think goes over at a 68, 70% clip.
I'd probably tail you if Fili was on a full camp, but him taking it on short notice is a little concerning as far as Dan being able to break him down the line. That's where I'd probably be a little concerned,
Yeah, I feel you. Is it me?
Yep.
All right, man. Main event. Jack Hermansson and Joe Pyfer. Shocker, we got middleweights in the Apex headlining, man. Jack Hermansson and Joe Pyfer are at completely 2 different points in their career, man. I do think Jack is likely on the tail end of his career, while Pyfer is on the come up with all the UFC backing. With the Hermansson side, starting with him, I think the guy's got above average wrestling. I don't think it's nothing elite, but he had some good entries on Roman Dolidze, man, and I think he might actually be able to take Joe Pyfer down a couple times here. He isn't really the biggest submission threat. I kind of think the Gastelum was a one-off. I don't see him submitting Joe Pyfer here. In terms of durability, I don't think Jack likes to get hit, truth be told. Vettori is not a very powerful puncher. He set him down in round 1. You could tell early on in the fight he was not comfortable with Cannonier's power. And when he feels it, I think it kind of breaks his confidence a little bit. If Jack realizes his game is not going according to plan in the first round or 2, odds are, he might get finished, or he's going to lay on bottom and give up the rest of the fight. His last 3 main event spots have been absolute snooze fest. So I do think this is a spot where the UFC is most definitely trying to prop up the Joe Pyfer side, who has a lot of the finishing upside in this fight early. I still think the cardio late. I don't want to jump the gun and say it's bad, but in 2019, we did see against the Jovan Pati, he did not have much left in the second round, and truth be told, there really wasn't an excuse for him not to have a gas tank there. And so I do still think it's up in the air on the gas tank over 5 rounds. He's strong as an ox, though, man. He's 8 years younger. We talked about the camp with Jeremiah Wells. Like, I love that camp as well. I think at one time they were like 17-0 in the UFC. So I do think a lot of things point to the UFC wanting Joe Pyfer to get done and Jack kind of being a journeyman at this stage. But he has been a mainstay of the middleweight division for what feels like a decade, man. And when I look at Pyfer, he's not been tested in the UFC. The regional losses are not aging well for me. It's his first main event spot, toughest test to date. When I see him on the mic, he's just got this sense of arrogance about him that I don't know, man. I know it's like I want to see you tested before I see that type of confidence in you. So I think there's value on Jack Hermansson here. I do, but I don't know if I want to get behind the UFC and Joe Pyfer. I don't know if I want to be on the other side of them. I'm actually going to pick Jack Hermansson by decision at plus 700. I think this is another one that's going to go the distance. I just have that feeling, man. I don't know. If Joe Pyfer doesn't get it done in the first round or two, I think it goes the full distance. So I'm going to take Jack Hermansson to be down after round 1 and likely win the next 3 or 4 rounds and still a decision.
So no, I think that you hit the nail on the head whenever you said Jack doesn't like getting hit. Yeah. And, guess who broke Francis Ngannou's record?
16-ounce gloves.
With 16-ounce gloves, right. No, but, you touched on the losses that stick out the most to me. It's the Thiago Santos and Jared Cannonier, the 2 guys who probably resemble Joe Pyfer's game the most as far as knockout power. And those 2 guys are starching him in the first and second round. But look at Joe Pyfer, and although he hasn't been tested, he has been tested in his grappling. He has competed in events against Gerald Meerschaert where, that's kind of Meerschaert's world, and he's able to stay out of harm's way for 15 minutes, win a decision in a grappling bout against Gerald Meerschaert. I just imagine that he's probably going to be able to stay safe if he is able to get top control over Jack Hermansson as well, if he isn't starching him early with the knockout shot. So I'm on Pyfer for sure. He's the second leg of my parlay. I only did 1 unit at plus 115. It's one of those ones where I can be as confident as I want to be, but you're right. He still is kind of untested. Jack Hermansson, certainly a serviceable middleweight. He's on a 400 and something day layoff at 35 years old, and that's a huge red flag for me. And ultimately, I do think that this is the UFC trying to showcase Joe Pyfer, who did just do some pretty incredible stuff at the UFC PI. And, it's a great spot for them to be able to do that in UFC or in the Apex in Las Vegas. So, yeah, I'm on the Joe Pyfer side to round out that parlay.
Gotcha, man. Head-to-head on a few, like a couple of the same guys, man. Keep an eye on Twitter. I know both of us will be releasing some bets as we get closer to fight time. Man, that's all 14 fights that we've gone through. Hopefully gave some good plays out. Looking to get back on track this week, man. Anything you want to add?
Nope.
I think it's 298 next week, is it not? Alexander Volkanovski and old Ilya Topuria. Excellent title fight. So ready to get into next week. Start looking at these fights. We'll catch you guys later.
Peace.